Part 1. The subtle shift, a gut feeling that won't let go. It all started with a feeling. A gut feeling. You know the kind. The one that whispers in the back of your mind when something feels off, but you can't quite place it. That quiet sense that lingers even when everything looks fine on the surface. A small change in tone. A hint of something different. I remember the first time I noticed it. Laura, my wife of 8 years, had always been open and warm, with a certain sharpness in her voice that I knew so well. It was the kind of sharpness that only comes when you've shared so much of your life with someone. But lately, when she'd say, "I'm going out for lunch with a friend," her voice held a softness, the kind of softness that seemed foreign, as though she were hiding something. I tried to push the thought away, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. After all, we'd been married for 8 years, 8 years of morning coffees, whispered dreams, and a deep understanding that comes only from truly knowing another person. We'd had our disagreements, sure, but who doesn't? I chalked it up to the natural wear and tear of life, but still, something nagged at me. It wasn't until that night, when I caught a glimpse of a late-night text on her phone, that the nagging feeling turned into a full-blown storm. Her phone was resting beside me on the couch, and as I reached for it absent-mindedly, I saw a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was short, just a few words. "Can't stop thinking about today." I stared at the message, feeling an odd sense of dread wash over me. When I asked Laura about it, she laughed it off nervously. "Oh, it's nothing," she said. "Just a group chat. You know how girls can be." I nodded, trying to ignore the rising tide of suspicion. But the seed had been planted. The following weeks were a blur of strange lunches and vague excuses. Laura's behavior became more erratic, her late nights more frequent. She seemed to be slipping away from me in ways that didn't make sense. But still, I didn't confront her, not yet. Part 2. The unthinkable truth. What I found on her phone. Days passed, and the unease only grew. I could no longer deny it. Something was wrong, something much bigger than I had originally thought. The gut feeling that had once been a whisper was now a scream in the back of my mind. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, the signs were undeniable. Laura's lunch dates became more frequent. Her excuses more vague. The smiles that once came so easily to her face were now often replaced with hurried, distracted expressions. I couldn't help but notice there was a distance between us now, one that hadn't been there before. And though I loved her, I couldn't shake the sense that she was slipping away into the arms of someone else. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just a phase. I told myself maybe I was being overly sensitive. But deep down, I knew better. The quiet whisper in my mind had turned into a roar, and I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. One afternoon, after she had left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter, I made a choice. It wasn't a decision I was proud of. But it was one I felt I had to make. I picked up her phone. Slowly, as if I were committing some kind of crime, I unlocked it. The screen lit up with dozens of messages, each one more damning than the last. The messages weren't just innocent exchanges between friends. They were intimate, explicit. Laura wasn't just having lunch with a friend. She was having an affair. The revelation hit me like a freight train. I had always believed that our relationship was solid, that nothing could tear us apart. But now, as I scrolled through the messages between her and Eric, the man she had been seeing, I felt a wave of nausea and anger wash over me. Eric! I didn't know much about him at first. But as I read through the texts, it became clear. He wasn't just some casual fling, he was a colleague, someone Laura had been working with for months. And their relationship was far deeper than I had ever imagined. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the years of shared history, the love we had once shared. Maybe it was the hope that there was some misunderstanding, some explanation that would make sense of all this. But deep down, I knew that was just a lie I was telling myself. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was betrayal, plain and simple. And what made it even worse was the emotional connection between them. The texts I read were filled with not just desire, but affection, care, and tenderness. Things I thought I had once shared with her. Things I thought were still ours. For a full week, I carried this burden in silence, unable to make a decision. Part of me wanted to confront her, to yell, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I plotted. I planned. I knew that I couldn't just let this go, not when my life had been shattered in this way. I was going to make her feel the weight of her choices. I was going to make her regret every single moment she spent betraying me. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way. And when I did, she would see the consequences of her actions in full force. Part 3. The plan. Preparing for the confrontation. I was no longer the same man I had been. The hurt, the humiliation, and the anger had transformed me into someone I didn't recognize. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. Though? No. I was going to take control. I was going to make Laura see the gravity of what she had done. And I wasn't going to do it in some emotional outburst or in the heat of the moment. I needed to plan, to think this through. If I was going to break her, I needed to do it with precision. The first thing I did was learn everything I could about Eric. Who was he? What did he do? How far did their affair really go? I dove deep into social media, digging into rabbit holes, piecing together information like a detective. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Eric was a sales representative for a company Laura had collaborated with on a recent project. He wasn't some random guy. He was someone she had worked with closely, someone who had been invited into our lives in a way I hadn't noticed. I wanted to learn more about him, so I did some more digging. I found his wife, Christine, on Facebook. She was a petite brunette with warm, kind eyes. She had 2 young children under 5. As I looked at her photos, I felt a pang of sympathy. She had no idea that her husband was doing the same thing to her that Laura was doing to me. But my sympathy for her didn't deter me from moving forward. In fact, it gave me another piece to the puzzle. If Laura was going to suffer, if she was going to truly regress her actions, I needed to bring Christine into this. She deserved to know I wasn't about to let my world fall apart in silence. I needed action. So I hired a private investigator, Frank. He was rough around the edges, with a face that looked like it had seen too many fights. But he got the job done. Frank wasn't some amateur. He had the skills to uncover the truth. And within days, he had confirmed everything I feared. He had photographs of Laura and Eric leaving a hotel together, their arms brushing against one another, their faces lit with laughter. He had even captured a photo of them kissing in her car. The proof was undeniable, hard, and unrefutable. I now had everything I needed. The next step was contacting Christine. I knew this would be the hardest part. How do you break something like this to a stranger? Someone who had no idea that her life was about to be destroyed in the same way mine had. I couldn't imagine how devastating it must have been for her. But I knew she deserved the truth. So I wrote her a simple message. Hi, Christine. This is going to be hard to hear, but I believe your husband, Eric, is having an affair with my wife, Laura. I've attached some photos for you. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this. Her response came an hour later, short but powerful. Thank you for telling me. Te Usha took me. The moment she knew there was no turning back, the ball had started rolling, and I had no control over where it would stop. But I had one final card to play. I wasn't just going to confront Laura and Eric alone. I wanted Laura to face the consequences of her betrayal. Feel it in her very core. I was going to bring Christine into the fold and make sure they understood the weight of what they'd done. Part 4. The confrontation, bringing everything to light. The day arrived. The day I had meticulously planned. I told Laura we were going to have lunch together, just the two of us. I hadn't suggested something like this in months, so when I asked her, she seemed relieved, almost eager. She probably thought my sudden attention was a sign that I hadn't suspected anything. Little did she know it was the calm before the storm. I spent the morning setting up the table. I wanted it to look inviting at first glance. A crisp white tablecloth, our finest silverware, and 2 glasses of wine. It looked like I was trying to rekindle some lost romance, to make her feel like everything was fine. But I had something much more powerful in mind. At the center of the table wasn't a vase of flowers, but a manila envelope filled with every damning piece of evidence Frank had gathered. Photos of them together, text messages dripping with intimacy, and the undeniable truth of their affair. When Laura walked in, she was smiling. Her cheeks flushed from what I could only assume had been a good lunch date with Eric. But as soon as she saw the table, the smile faded from her face. She froze, her eyes darting from the envelope to me, then back again. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Instead, I just gestured for her to sit. Reluctantly, she did, her face now a shadow of the happiness it had held moments ago. I slid the envelope toward her, my expression calm, almost eerily so. "Open it," I said, my voice steady, but sharp. She hesitated, glancing at me one last time before reluctantly opening the envelope. Her hands shook as she sifted through the photos and printed text messages, each one more incriminating than the last. I could see her jaw tightening as she processed each image, each word. I can explain, she stammered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Explain. I leaned back in my chair, the calmness in my tone hiding the storm brewing inside me. Explain what? Laura. That you've been lying to me for months. That you've been sneaking around with a married man. That you've been treating our marriage like it's disposable. Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not like that," she whispered, her voice weak. "Then what is it like?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been having your cake and eating it too." Her sobs filled the room as she crumbled before me. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was now nothing more than a broken shell. She cried and apologized, but those words meant nothing to me now. When she finally looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, I dropped the final bombshell. "I've spoken to Christine," I said, my words cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. Her eyes widened in horror. "You what?" she gasped. "She knows everything," I replied, my voice cold and matter-of-fact, just like I do. "You've destroyed not one, but 2 families. Congratulations, Laura." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. I stood and opened it. Christine walked in, her face calm, but her eyes burning with anger. Behind her was Eric, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. Laura's face went pale. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is closure." The confrontation that followed was ugly. Christine unleashed years of pent-up frustration on Eric, tearing into him with a ferocity I hadn't expected. Eric stammered like a fool, trying to justify his actions with weak excuses. But it wasn't just Eric who had to answer. Laura tried to intervene, but Christine turned on her with the fury of a lioness. "Don't you dare try to justify this," Christine snarled. "You're selfish, deceitful." The words she used weren't fit for polite company. And they didn't stop there. Eric finally tried to defend himself, mumbling about feeling unappreciated at home. I cut him off. My anger rises. "Unappreciated," I scoffed. "You've got two beautiful kids and a wife who would move heaven and earth for you. And this is how you repay her." By the end of it, everyone was broken. Laura and Eric were shells of the people they had been when they walked into that room. Christine and I exchanged a silent look, an acknowledgement that, though we had both been betrayed, we had come out of this stronger. Part family, the fallout, the price of betrayal. The aftermath was swift, almost like a tidal wave crashing down, leaving only wreckage in its wake. Laura left that evening, her bags packed hastily, her face a mask of guilt and sorrow. It was the first time I had seen her so broken, so utterly defeated. For the first time in our relationship, she wasn't the strong, confident woman I had once admired. She was just a woman who had lost everything she once held dear. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that I had let her slip through my fingers for so long without truly seeing it. Maybe I had been too trusting, too comfortable in the life we had built together, but no more. I knew what I had to do next. The following morning, I filed for divorce. I didn't look back. It wasn't out of spite, but out of necessity. I had to move on. I had to reclaim the pieces of myself that Laura's affair had torn apart. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Christine didn't hesitate either. She filed for divorce from Eric the next day. Though it wasn't the path she had wanted, it was the one she knew she had to take. The hurt in her eyes mirrored mine, but she was stronger than she appeared. She had two young children to take care of, and though her world had been shattered, she knew she couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. Eric, too, paid the price for his actions. When Christine sent the photos and messages to his employer, his life began to unravel. His career, which he had worked so hard to build, came crashing down. He was fired from his job, a consequence of his own betrayal. As for Laura, her reputation took a massive hit as well. Word of the affair spread quickly among our friends, family, and acquaintances. The once charming woman, who had been the life of every gathering, was now the subject of whispers and judgment. People who had once admired her now looked at her with disdain, and I couldn't say I felt sorry for her. She had brought this upon herself. There was no escaping the fallout from her actions, rebuilding a life from the ashes. It wasn't easy. There were days when I could barely bring myself to get out of bed. The weight of the betrayal, the emotional exhaustion, it all weighed on me like an anchor, dragging me deeper into despair. I had to fight through the darkness, through the overwhelming sadness that seemed to never end. But with time, the pain began to fade. The anger simmered down, replaced by a quiet resolve. I started therapy shortly after the divorce papers were signed. I knew I needed help. needed someone to talk to who could help me process everything that had happened. Therapy was not a quick fix, but it was a step in the right direction. I learned to confront my feelings of anger, of betrayal, and the crushing humiliation that had haunted me for so long. Running became my therapy. 2. I started jogging every morning, pushing myself physically to clear my head. There was something therapeutic about feeling the burn in my legs, the rush of endorphins. As I took control of my body, when everything else in my life seemed out of control, slowly but surely, I began to rebuild myself. I reached out to old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. Their support was invaluable. They reminded me of who I was before the marriage, before the betrayal. They helped me rediscover parts of myself that I had buried in the wake of my failed relationship. A new beginning. A year later, I could honestly say that I was in a better place. I was happier than I had been in a long time. I had found a sense of peace that I thought I'd lost forever. The anger I once felt toward Laura and Eric had faded. I had let go of the need for revenge and instead focused on healing. I had learned to value myself more than I ever had before. I had learned to set boundaries, to demand honesty and respect from the people in my life. I realized that I deserved more than the lies and betrayal I had been subjected to. As for Laura, I heard from mutual friends that she and Eric didn't make it. The guilt was too heavy, the weight of their actions too much for their relationship to survive. They had burned their bridges, and though they may have tried to repair their broken lives, it seemed that the damage was irreparable. In some ways, that was its own kind of justice. I was moving forward, and that was what mattered. I had reclaimed my life. I had found my strength again. Revenge or redemption? Looking back on it now, I do not know if I would have chosen revenge if I had known the toll it would take on my heart. But I do know one thing. It was the catalyst I needed to reclaim my power, to take back control of my life. In a way, revenge isn't the healthiest motivation. It's born of pain, of hurt, of the desperate need to make things right. But in this case, it was the fuel that ignited my journey toward healing. Through the chaos, the anger, and the devastation, I had found a new version of myself, a version that didn't let betrayal define me, a version that took responsibility for his own happiness. Maybe it wasn't the prettiest way to get there, but I got there. And that's all that matters now.